The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Steven Sakash here with my co-host, Tulio Siragusa, and we've got a special guest who we'll introduce in a moment. So business leaders often spend enormous energy creating strategies, transformation plans, articulating values, priorities, and change initiatives. But a strategy is not truly activated until people understand it and feel connected to it. And that is where empathy and storytelling become really powerful tools. And today we're exploring storytelling that builds connection in business. And Tulio, introduce our special guest today. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. It'll be my pleasure. Our guest today is Ben Green. He's a lead consultant at the Storytellers, which is part of Accenture. Ben has spent the last 7 years working globally with C-suite leaders and organizations to transform workplaces through the power of storytelling. The Storytellers' fundamental belief is that the emotional connection and innate power of story should not be taken for granted in the working world. The Storytellers uses 6-chapter story framework to help organizations transform and manage change through powerful human stories. Ben's background is in behavioral change, psychology, and leadership development, and he has spent more than a decade thinking about the ways to make organization more human. Ben is also a coach, facilitator, and consultant to senior leaders, helping them connect people to strategy, purpose, and meaningful action. Welcome to the Bliss Business Podcast, Ben.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited about this conversation and super passionate about this topic. So looking forward to getting into it and chatting with you both.
Yeah, we only got 40 minutes. It'll go by quick, Ben, because it's when you're passionate about stuff like that, it's like
it flies by.
Yeah, you think you can do a couple episodes at least. But so from your perspective, why is empathy such an important leadership capability right now?
Yeah, I think it's such a important question to think about in the working world. And one of the things I love, I don't know if you've ever seen Brené Brown, who does a great video on the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I always start with that when I'm thinking about empathy. Sympathy is this looking down and saying, oh, that looks bad, I feel sorry for you. And people and leaders often can confuse that with empathy. And empathy is really putting yourself in their shoes. And I think, as we all know, and I've seen you guys talk about in other episodes, that the world is changing so much, both at work, the amount of transformation, the role that AI is playing in our working world, but also outside of it, in politics, in day-to-day life, everything is changing. And it's quite a tough time for people to keep up to speed with everything that's going on. People need to be felt and heard and seen and connected to. Otherwise, it becomes one more overwhelming thing for people to really deal with, which is why I think empathy is so important. We spend such a big part of our lives at work. If you don't feel like you're treated as a human and really connected to and understood, everything else can sort of fall apart around that. And if you ultimately want to take a strategy and do something meaningful with it, you need to get the trust and the connection to the people that you're working with.
I love your reference to Brené Brown. Where do you think most leaders fail in terms of understanding what empathy is and how it applies? What is the misunderstanding based on your experience and working with leaders? Because you guys work at the intersection of behavioral change, psychology, and leadership development. So I'm just curious, what leaders often misunderstand about empathy?
Yeah, I think empathy can sometimes be seen as a soft skill, as something that's a nice to have that is almost a sign of, I guess, weakness sometimes. It's kind of the same that we actually experience when we talk to C-suites and senior leaders about storytelling. Some of them get it and they understand that it really is a non-negotiable in 2026 for businesses to be successful. But I think the word fluffy, I don't know if that's a US word that you guys would use too, but it's something it's something fluffy to be discussing that isn't going to really drive business performance. It's something that shows weakness, but I think you can be empathic and you can still say no and you can still challenge people, but you connect to them more at a human level. But I think that's one of the biggest things that I've seen is it feels like a nice to have, a soft skill as opposed to a critical lever, really.
Yeah. Like the storyteller. So you've said empathy has become, even more important as organizations navigate like hybrid work, attrition, ongoing transformation. So how can leaders create empathetic connection when teams are really, distributed? I know this is a challenge for everyone, and we're often under pressure with all that too. But we're often siloed, and how do you help create that connection, that empathetic connection through your
Yeah, I think one of the things that leaders often think about is that they just need to keep communicating more. And I don't think that is always the answer if the communication isn't the right sort of communication. Naturally, probably unsurprisingly, given the company is called the Storytellers and what we do, but story is a huge part for us about keeping that connection alive, bringing it back to those real world examples, that kind of tangible, what does this genuinely look like on the ground? How can I see myself in what you're communicating? Why should I personally care about it, be passionate about it, and invest in this? And that kind of human level. And I think a lot of the time managers have the most difficult role in organizations because they sit in that middle ground where they're not dictating the ultimate strategy that sits above, but they have the responsibility for the people who are experiencing this change. And I think those managers having the right capability and being able to communicate at a localized level the journey that an organization is going on and what it means for them, for their division or their team, wherever they might sit, is super important, because otherwise you end up with this real disparity between where the business wants to go and where I sit in the organization. So leveraging managers and telling human stories to connect, I think is super important in this world that we now live in that is so hybrid and virtual.
How can leaders tell if they aren't if they're communicating without truly connecting? How can they tell that, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think obviously you've got all of the kind of hard metrics that we always recommend organizations look at, that kind of the trust, the connection. I can see myself in this journey. I understand what the strategy means to me, but I think it's almost a disconnection, an absenteeism that people might display in the workplace that you have to look out for. It's that discretionary effort that people give when they're truly connected, that concept of going above and beyond, not because you've asked them to, but because they're passionate about what the business is trying to achieve and they want to be part of that journey. That's so important to see. And if you're getting that right and people really buy into that, you will start to see that discretionary effort and that passion. And also, I think thinking outside the box where you're having more of a two-way dialogue. If it's a real one-way communication stream, you might feel like that silence is almost a bit of a sign that you're not connecting with people. When people start to provide suggestions back or challenge or speak up or come up with their own ideas, you're connecting with them at some level where they're, I guess, laterally actually thinking about what this journey means for them, which is a good sign. But I don't know if you guys, what your experience is with that, if you've any different ideas.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's hard when you're on the other side and you haven't felt it before, right? When you're just going through the emotions and you're communicating and you think everyone's kind of getting it. But then when you see people actually really connecting and really getting it, I don't even know how to describe that, but it's like you said, there is that passion that kind of comes to life where that they see meaning in what they're doing, versus, I don't know if you've ever seen someone find meaning in increasing shareholder value or something like that. We've seen companies with that kind of purpose. You're just not tapping into anything human really there. But if your business is aligned with some, sort of bigger purpose, greater good, something that you're doing, if you haven't experienced that before, it's really hard to describe that difference. But I always say it's like suddenly you've got this cold sort of machine of a business, and then now suddenly you've got this soul in the business hands, this living organic thing that you can feel, right?
It is a feeling, yeah.
Yeah, that may be the best way I could describe it.
Yeah. When a bunch of us crazies started radicalpurpose.org almost 9 years ago, we went on a mission for 3 years to study and try to understand what makes people tick and what makes them stay engaged inside of an organization. And finding meaning was one of the key tenets, like belonging to something greater than yourself. These are not just things important in an organization. It's things that matter to us as human beings, like belonging to something greater than ourselves. That's why religion and politics is so big, right? Be meaning behind what we're doing, being able to make an impact, to be able to grow. Grow. The self-help industry is like $1 trillion or bigger. So once people connect to that, in storytelling does a great job in connecting in a very human way to things, because it gives meaning to something, then something clicks in people. Right? Like, this is meaningful to me because I'm connecting to what I need. It's about meeting the needs of the individual. And we all
is that why people need, why do people need meaning before they can commit to change? I mean, question for both of you, like, why?
Because meaning it meets a need. It's a personal need to be able to connect to something that has meaning. It's an innate need. Like, if it's not met,
it does feel like it's an innate need that we're all
wired for it.
Wired for it, right?
Without it, it's like, I'm just going to go through the motion because I have to, but there's no connection to it. But if it meets that's the whole thing, is that a lot of leaders fail to understand there's needs that people have. If you can synthesize how you run your business in such a way that meets their personal needs, their emotional needs, they'll go to the moon for you. Yeah. And that's what I love about storytelling, because it's the greatest way to connect people, to something that changes a conversation into something meaningful. Like, it connects the beginning and an end, and in between there's a challenge or something. You see yourself in the story. That's really what it comes down to. If people can't see themselves in it, then it's just transactional, and transactional doesn't connect people.
It's 100% true, isn't it? And like, it's a super old model, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of talks about that concept, right? Human beings need meaning and a deeper level of thought and idea, and we spend most of our lives in our jobs, so it's really important that we get something out of that. Like, a lot of people don't just want to come to work today and just experience that day and that be over. They want to give themselves a reason to get up, because it makes it easier to process. It makes it more enjoyable to build those relationships. If I can, I'd love to share a small story. I worked with an insurance firm in Australia, and one of the biggest challenges that they were launching a brand new strategy. And one of the biggest internal challenges that they were having was that they really needed their leadership team to be really passionate about what they were doing. And the fundamental kind of belief at the time was, we just work in insurance, like, we're not saving lives here. And there was kind of like that, what we're talking about really, that discretionary effort wasn't there, that real belief, that real meaning. And we worked with some of the leadership team to create a narrative that really talked about the exciting journey and the value that they were adding. And they had hundreds of pages of strategy documents and lots of other things that organizations always have. But the one single thing that completely shifted the dial and genuinely turned the momentum of the business round is, I worked with this one lady who was head of marketing. She was going to get on stage, and she was like, I want to tell a personal story that conveys the message that insurance can be a really powerful thing, and we're all part of a bigger purpose here. And it was a heartbreaking story, and not everyone has this sort of story to tell. But she explained to me that she'd lost her husband in a car accident a few years earlier, tragically. And she said, the reason I'm telling you that, and the reason a lot of people in this business don't know this, but I want to tell them the story of that day and the emotions that I went through when I found out we'd lost him. And then she did that in front of the 100 leaders, and she put up pictures of her kids at school now, going on holidays together. And she told this story, nothing to do with why insurance is important, but she then brought it back to this point. She said, before he tragically passed away, they had conversations about, should we get life insurance? We're in our 40s, we don't need it yet, let's think about this another day. And he kept nagging her, and eventually they did. And then she put up these pictures of her kids and said, that life insurance is the reason why I can still send my kids to school. We can still go on holidays together. They can still have this relatively normal life in extremely difficult circumstances. And she said, that's what we're doing here. We're not doing insurance. We're giving people that option to continue living, to give them hope in their darkest hours and their days. And I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, but more than that, people understood what it was that they did through the story that she told. So a long-winded way to 100% agree with you, Tulio. I've seen the way stories can genuinely create meaning when they're used in the right way.
It's so true. And most companies are failing at this, which is why the stats show that they're like only 31% of employees are engaged in the US, and globally it's worse, 21%. What it means is like we're paying people a full year's salary to only get 3 months out of work, 3 months worth of work. And it's not their fault. They have nothing to connect to. There's no meaning. There's no purpose. There's no empathy. They're just being treated like cogs. It's very transactional. And the outcome is clear. This is what happens when you don't have meaning, when you don't have purpose. It's exactly what's happening in the world over. It's not good. And yet Wall Street accepts it as those companies, even public company, they have 31% productivity, but they're doing good. How much better could they do if they actually cared about the needs of people? It's not even like a nice thing to do. It's strategic now. Like, why would you not look at this? This is smart business to actually be more human in how you run your business. The stats is there. It's no longer foo-foo stuff. It's data, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And every company has a story. It doesn't matter what industry you work in, who you are. There are stories that you can tell your people that give them meaning. It's just about finding them and unlocking them and sharing them with people.
Yeah. And I almost get this I don't know, this emotional reaction when I just hear we just do insurance. Because I think so many people right now are just like, well, yeah, that's what I feel when I'm dealing with my insurance company. And it's usually in kind of the worst moments of their lives when they're 100%. Dealing with that. And if I'm having to deal with someone that just does insurance in that, it's just like you said, this is where your work comes to play, where you got to get internally everyone kind of aligned behind, no, you don't just do insurance. This is what you guys are doing. And so thinking about that a little bit, we talk about systems a lot here, and you guys kind of co-create these kind of compelling narratives that help people understand what the story means for their part in a business, and how they can play that part. We like to talk about systems. So is there I think you mentioned a little bit your process, but is there a system or framework to help storytelling move beyond just words and become into action?
Yeah, I think one thing to start on is we kind of define the difference between narrative and story, and we use both. We think they're both absolutely critical levers for an organization to go through a successful transformation, but they're kind of different in our words. A famous British person that I'm sure you guys all know and love too, David Attenborough, he's a great example of the difference between narrative and story. So he really leveraged this narrative at the time that plastic pollution was terrible for the planet. Like, everybody knew that. That's a narrative. That's a high level messaging framework that everyone can understand. But he did this episode of like a Planet Life where he followed this family of turtles, gave them names and characters, and showed this one really harrowing scene where they had this beer can plastic wrapped around their neck. And that was the biggest catalyst for people doing something about their recycling and plastic, was that story. But people needed to understand the narrative that plastic pollution is bad first, and then connect to the story. So I share that because that's what we really do with organizations. We use a framework, a 6-chapter narrative framework that's based on Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. So a framework for telling a great story. Every chapter is super important and it plays a very different role. So you've got the pride and purpose chapters, as well as the current reality, the honest, authentic look that we kind of need to face into. And that provides the high level messaging that the business or the business unit is going on. And we use that as a tool to align leadership, to make sure they're all committed behind it, to engage the business in so that they really understand it. And then the capability building of leaders and managers to take that out and localize it to their teams and bring that to life with the small stories. They're going to make it meaningful. So you can have a two-way dialogue, a framework for conversation as such, to actually genuinely drive change is then kind of what comes next. So it acts as a leadership tool fundamentally, and it can act as a great alignment tool. But then for all the creative work and the videos and the toolkits that we can then create behind the scenes can help drive that change through the influencers and the people in the business.
Now, if we could just expand on this a little bit, because
Yeah.
you guys have a framework, you have a system, and you call it the 6-chapter story framework.
That's right.
That Storytellers has developed. And this is designed to help organizations transform and manage change. Can you tell us a little bit about why does having a structured approach to story, why is that so effective in helping people understand change? And can you walk us through what those 6 chapters are, maybe the cliff notes of it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Got a hint at a couple. It's like usually when you say like we got 6, it's like, well, let's hear them all. That's it.
Let's hear them all. Yeah, sorry, I gave you the super short cliff notes. So let me go through them 100%. So the 6 chapters. So I said it was based on Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey, and that's a much wider step-by-step process, and we really wanted to boil it down for something that can actually be digestible in a workplace with so much noise and content already. Anything that's too long is not going to land. So you start like any good story in chapter 1. That's the pride and purpose. What are the strengths we have as a business that we want to continue to take forwards? What do we want to celebrate in our heritage? And then that emotional curve almost dips immediately. So if you're watching a film, something has to go wrong, otherwise the film stays at a platonic emotion the whole way through. Something always happens that creates an emotion, and that's our chapter 2, which is the challenges, why we can't stay as we are. And it has to be authentic, because otherwise it just becomes propaganda. This isn't a PR exercise narrative. It's a genuine, honest look and a chance for leaders to stand up in front of their people and say, we've not got everything right. Going back to this empathy point, we know how some of this stuff in the past may have felt. So that chapter is really important. And then you move out of that emotional dip into the opportunity. So you get people excited about, if we get this journey right, what's the opportunity that we can unlock? What gives us confidence we can be successful? And then we get into what we always call the engine room of the story, which is chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4 is where the strategy sits. What's the plan? What are we actually going to do? So underneath chapter 4, there might be the strategic documents, the plan on the pages that sit underneath that. But in simple human language, what is the strategy that we're taking? And that's very much coupled with chapter 5, which is the human side of that. What are the behaviors, the values, the mindsets that we need each and every person in the business to live to make this strategy come to life and make this journey come to life? And it might not always just be the values of the business, because actually, if in chapter 2 we've talked about a challenge, that might need certain behaviors. So it might need much more honest talk. It might need much more feedback at the moment. So really calling out how we need everyone's help. The leadership commitment is what we're driving in the strategy. How can you all play your part? And then chapter 6, like any good story, is the final desired destination. Now, this isn't a definitive endpoint, because organizations keep breathing, keep living, keep growing. But in 3 or 5 years from now, if we're successful, what will it feel like for you? What are you as employees going to get out of this? What will our customers be saying about us? What will we be celebrating together? And then a lot of the vision work and the vision an organization might have will feed into that. So it's about creating that overarching journey, but in really simple human language that anyone in the business can understand and see their role within. Hopefully that was cliff notes enough.
No, I love it. That's perfect. And I'm thinking about that almost, I guess, that last chapter, kind of where you mentioned, where do we want to be in a couple of years or so? Like, how do organizations keep the story alive? What kind of tips do you have for that?
Yeah, no, it's a really important point, because often when the narrative is launched, but that's when the hard work starts and not ends. So we have a couple of things that we really focus on. So the second half of our approach is really about activate and embed. How do we bring this to life in everything a business does? So whether that's building this into induction and recruitment design, so that anyone joining the business can really understand the journey and the role that they play? How can we equip managers to continue to use this framework and their own personal stories to engage their teams and drive change? But as you said, over time, 3-4 years from now, you need the next episode. And we always encourage the organizations we work with to then look at creating that next episode. Like a Star Wars franchise, the first episode almost sets out, this is where we are now, and this is the ultimate end state by the time we get to film 10, 11, 12, whatever they're on now. But then the next episode is the continuation of that middle part of the journey. So we work with an organization to refine that over time as well.
And just thinking aloud, so almost like the next episode, you go back through that whole process again, because I know, like, if you're doing a sequel, when you're in Hollywood, it's like that 10 to 12 minute mark. That's where you get that problem again, and then you kind of go through the same.
Yeah.
So I'm picturing, you kind of go through that whole soul cycle again, right?
100%. But you don't replace the vision, and you don't replace what we've achieved.
You're building on top of it again with some of the same.
100%, and reflecting the reality now, because businesses move so fast. We almost know for certain a business won't look like in 3 years what it does when that first narrative is created.
All right. Let's see. We've got an audience question. Should we go to that too, Leo?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. How do you adapt a story for a global team without losing its core message across different cultures?
Good question.
That is a great question. Yeah. And every culture interprets storytelling differently as well. So there has to be different approaches. I think when we work with organizations that are globally based, you have to make sure that messaging framework initially is super simple and super clear and sits at that global level. But this is really then what I was talking about, the importance of upskilling managers and leaders at that local level, because they will understand the culture and the people within that region, and will work with them to create and define how best are you going to be able to engage your people in the most effective way. What is it that they need? What works from a communication, from a leadership point of view in this culture? So help us shape what will work for you there. It's that kind of global strategy. I know Coca-Cola always talks about global overall, but that need for local, what works, because otherwise if you try and enforce things on people, it's not going to land.
I have found that what works well in that, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is not to start with the expected outcome, but to be clear about the intention, the intention that would produce the right outcome, and then letting people develop the story or how they want to communicate based on the culture. But the intention doesn't change. Like, you can have the same intention across multiple cultures. It's how you deliver and how you communicate it that could change based on culture. What are your thoughts on that? Have you, when you guys go through this, do you focus more on sort of the purpose behind the message or the outcome? I'm curious.
Yeah. 100%. No, you're absolutely right. And this goes back probably to the first conversation we were having about creating meaning. I think one of the things that we always set out to achieve is if people at the end of an engagement with us can sit and say, I understand clearly now the direction of travel, or I understand much better the direction of travel as the business, and I understand the role that I play within that, and I can connect to that. That's kind of ticking a couple of the really core boxes of what we're trying to achieve. So that is the intention, is that people get meaning and understand what the journey means for them and how they can play their role. So however you get there, exactly as you said, doesn't hugely matter. And it's about finding the right solutions for the right audiences. So yeah, absolutely. I think intention is critical in the approach to cascading a global narrative.
Thinking about kind of the global businesses that seems to be more and more the way of life these days is we're all from different time zones, different part of the country, very remote. One of the greatest friction points to change are these silos, I think, and not just remotely, but even teams and stuff like that. How can storytelling kind of reduce the silos?
I think, again, it's the reason why storytelling is such a powerful tool in our day-to-day lives. Like, you think about the way that we live, stories are all around us, and it's been like that since the day of cave women and cavemen. We use stories to build relationships, to learn what's safe to do, not safe to do. Whether we listen to a song or put on a Netflix series, whatever it is, storytelling is all around us, and because we're hardwired, really. It taps into our emotions and our human connection. And I think that's one of the ways it breaks down silos, is because it really kind of connects with you at a base innate human level. So if people are telling stories, you are responding to that in a physiological way. I think one of the things I'm always trying to achieve in projects to support a business is that people feel something different. Like, it doesn't feel business as usual. You know, when you go home to your family and they ask you how your day's been at work, if it's significant enough to talk about that and want to share that, that's doing something right. You're making people feel something different. And I think story has a huge ability to be able to do that. And that's why it can break down silos, because it goes back to this empathy mapping and almost that kind of mirroring. If we can connect with people via stories, we start to build a connection where otherwise there was a silo.
I love that. And when you break the silos down, you end up with community. And I think storytelling, I always think of this tribal idea of like a matriarch or a patriarch sitting around in family and the village listening and learning from it. I mean, it's kind of invokes this feeling and this sense of community that the storytellers would create, and legacy. So how does storytelling help build community inside of an organization? Just to build on this breaking out of the silos idea.
Yeah, and I think it's what we've started to talk about there. Storytelling, because of its history and because of the way that it interacts with us at human level, has that capability to build trust, to build connection, to really enable individuals to see each other in a different light. And I think, especially from a managerial perspective, if you can, with your team or with other teams, start sharing stories instead of PowerPoint decks. Like, no one ever built a great relationship with someone because of slide 74 of a PowerPoint deck that they've shared, but they might do because of the stories that they've shared and the way that they've engaged with them. And I think stories touch our emotions, and emotions is a huge part of how you build community. You feel like you're all on a journey together, and that's why the narrative is important in this journey, because every individual employee of a business needs to buy into this overarching journey that we're going on. So no matter the stories a manager might tell, whether they're in IT or finance, you've got to then connect that back up to the narrative. And if every single person, no matter what you do on the business or your seniority level, can say by the end of a project, we're part of this overarching narrative, then you're naturally part of this community going on this journey together to achieve that chapter 6 vision. So I think that's the way it brings people together all towards this same purpose.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to rally around slide 74 of the right?
Never. Not by 74 anyway, maybe 34, you might still have a chance.
If I made it to slide 74, you know, and but no, I mean, seriously, it's like slide 74, but that's the point. Sometimes that's the message that you're just getting, is just, it just feels like that slide 74, right? There's no the emotional conditions aren't there for people to embrace change, right? And
the only story arc there is that you're almost done. When the person says, we're almost done with the deck, that's when you're like, that's when you start to feel relief that the thought of it being almost done.
I know.
It reminds you of
if
guy
you have to even say that, justify that.
He had like a 600 deck slide deck, and he knew where everything was. Now, he didn't present 600 slide, but anytime a client had a question, he'd pull a slide from this deck that had the answer. And I'm like, how do you do that? He goes, yeah, I have like 600 slides, and I've thought of every possible question, and I just pull it out and present the answer. I'm like, I mean, that's a beautiful skill you have. I wish I could do that. But could you imagine 600 slide? You just pull the right answer from the slide. Oh, that's slide number 322. I mean, you have
like a perfect use for AI is what I'm hearing nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Right. He was like a human AI at the time. Oh, goodness.
But it's like I said, I mean, that's the emotional conditions for people embracing change aren't there, you know, and stuff like that. You know, just telling them, this is the change, right? That's what slide 74 feels like. Why is this distinction so important for people to kind of understand?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's critical because you have to build that connection. And like a lot of the time we're working with organizations, the narrative comes, like the detail has to be there, right? The strategy has to be there. We're never denying that it's not a critical part of how businesses get things done, but you have to get that emotional buy-in first. Exactly as you guys were saying, you're never going to be in a psychological state to really understand the vision and get excited by it if your brain is just overwhelmed with all this data and information. So you have to create the motivation, the momentum, the means for people to really care about the journey that they're going to go on. And I think a narrative is a great way of setting that scene. And it's also something different. Like a lot of organizations won't present the journey that they're going on through stories, and that immediately is great if you're adopting it as a business, because it feels different as part of that organization. You're immediately in a different emotional state, so you're kind of primed and ready then to engage in the detail that's to follow.
Yeah, I think we're a lot of times in marketing, I mean, we're always telling a story of some type, you know, not just through our marketing, but what's the data, the story behind the data and all that too. And it's always, that's the best way to communicate, you know, things that can be on the face of it look like slide 74. You know, it's like all that data and all that stuff is just, you've got to wrap it around something that people can kind of grasp.
Yeah, and it has, sorry, I was just going to say final thing on that the narrative then becomes like, we almost describe it as a kind of coat hanger. So if you set up that overarching framework, everything that any leader wants to talk about that's in detail connects back up to that. So if you can understand in simple human language the journey, anything that then sits underneath that, you and your brain can almost like file it under chapter 2, chapter 4. So all those dots start to join up, and it's a much easier way to make sense of things. And people know that stories, when told, you remember so much more of a story than you remember data and facts and proof points. It's just the way the human brain works. So it enables you to store and file all of that and connect all of that stuff together that follows.
Yeah, you know, thinking about, you had talked about kind of that insurance story. This is kind of transitions to like one of the questions I always ask on here, because that was a perfect example, I think, of it. But the question is, what role should love play in business?
Yeah, I think love is not about avoiding discomfort or kind of shying away from that, but love is about genuinely caring and finding that meaning, and stories are a way that you can connect with people. I think love is so important because that we spend, as we said before, so much of our lives in work. If you can connect with people in a human level, then you're going to achieve so much more. And one of the things that is a reality of everything that we've talked about today is, like, you can have very different storytellers and different empathic leaders who show love, but it's not easy. It takes time and active thought and process. And often leaders work in an environment that is already, they're oversubscribed with goals and missions. And like, we face that a lot as a challenge. I don't have the headspace to do this properly, even though I might buy into it. But I would always say to them, find a way to create that, because the rewards from it, when you can dedicate time to showing care and compassion to people in a way that really connects them to the strategy that you want to drive, the rewards will be endless, but it does take time and effort.
Yeah,
I guess storytelling to a certain degree, it really connects us to the feeling. I think it invokes love. You know, to put together, to share something like that, it's got to be motivated by the desire. What's the desire ultimately that's motivating someone to tell a story? You know, it's not just impart information. I think it's an expression of love. That's probably why there's not enough of it being done in business, because everybody shies away from this idea of showing love, which is what is needed the most. You know?
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, if no one remembered anything from this show today, but you could give them a good, solid, practical storytelling habit that can help leaders build stronger community and connection right away, what would that be?
Yeah, I would say it's always challenging yourself to think about because leaders are always going to have a message that they want to share with their teams. Challenge yourself, ask yourself every time, can I share this with a story? And don't be afraid to move away from business speak in order to do that. So think about ultimately some of the real basics. What message do I want to convey here? Spend half an hour, and it'll get quicker the more you practice this. But is there a way that I can say this that is different, that maybe changes the emotional tone, that maybe uses imagery, that maybe shares a video, but makes the point I want to make in a different way that isn't through slides and data and graphics? Is it me being vulnerable and personal and talking about my own personal experience? Challenge yourself to think about, how can I convey a message through story and see the impact that might have. I would say that's the one thing every leader could do right away. And you do it in your own style with what you're comfortable with, but start sharing stories.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, Ben, where can listeners learn more about you, the Storytellers, your work? Where should they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got our website, thestorytellers.com, where you can find out more about the sort of work that we do, and also reach out to me on LinkedIn, or my email is ben.green@thestorytellers.com. So super straightforward, but we're always happy to listen and hear about client challenges and what you're going through, and see how and where we can support. We do capability building as well as the kind of full narrative creation and engagement processes, both at a business unit and an overall organizational level. So always happy to chat.
Ben, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
To our audience, if you're saying something like, we just sell insurance, or we just sell this or that, try and go a little deeper. Like, what do you really do? How are you impacting human lives? That's really where the stories probably exist. And, that's what we love to hear as marketers too, is these great stories of the things you really do and really how you truly do impact people. But that's it for today on the Bliss Business Podcast, and we will see you next time.